It's just 1 week until the F1 season begins, and so it's time for me to make my 2023 season predictions. I'm recording this before the beginning of pre-season testing, but there's a lot of information that we can take from last season given the regulations are remaining relatively stable. But I'm sure there's an awful lot for me to get wrong, so let's have a look. My name's Andy, and this is Behind the Drive. Constructors' Championship. As always, I'm going to start with the Constructors' Championship. Tomo produced an interesting view of the championship when looking at the second half of the season only, and I've taken that view into account when thinking about which order to choose for this prediction. Number 10, Alfa Romeo. The team I think will sit at the bottom of the 2023 championship is Alfa Romeo. The team were 9th in the second half of the season ranking, and they had a real dip in form from the first half of the year to the second. This may have been due to the fact that they switched their development focus to this season, but it feels like the path they were taking with their car from last year wasn't giving me any confidence that they might be able to take a step forwards going into this year. If the team does drop to last, then it will represent one of the quickest falls to the back, considering how far up the order they were at the beginning of the 2022 season. Number 9, Williams. In 9th, I have Williams, the team that were actually 8th in the standings based on the second half of last year. This was a surprise for me to learn considering how far behind 9th they were in the standings overall. That shows that last year there were more opportunities for the lower teams early on in the season, as the teams were all trying to improve their cars and get the maximum from them. However, on the whole, I think it's clear that the Williams car is unlikely to take a great leap forward in 2023. The team have lost their technical designer and team principal, and so they're going into a new rebuild with James Vowles at the helm. But I anticipate them being more competitive compared to where they were last year. Number 8, Haas. I've put Haas next in 8th despite the fact that they were the worst performing team in the second half of the year. However, there are a few factors that suggest Haas won't be at the bottom of the standings. The first is their driver lineup. Replacing Schumacher with Hulkenberg might not be particularly interesting, but I do believe they've improved their lineup in the short term. As a result, I think that both drivers will be able to get more from their cars this year. It's not just that though, as Hulkenberg is also a safe pair of hands. The team can trust that he won't end up putting it in the barrier as frequently as Schumacher has done, which will result in less damage and more available money for development. So it's 8th position for Haas. Number 7, AlphaTauri. AlphaTauri had a difficult start to the new aerodynamic era as they ended up 9th in the championship. They weren't as competitive as they've been so often in the past and dropped out of the midfield. But with the backing that this team has, I see them progressing back up the order and beginning a return towards that midfield pack. They've changed their car significantly this year, and it will be interesting to see how that plays out when the competitive racing gets underway. The new look pairing at AlphaTauri is inexperienced but has a lot of potential. I'm really looking forward to seeing how Nick de Vries gets on in his debut season. At 28, he's expected to perform better than some of the drivers that entered the sport when they were 10 years younger, but I have every confidence that he'll deliver for the team and lead them up the order. Number 6, McLaren. McLaren had a tough year in 2022. They had a troubled start to testing in Bahrain after a promising first test in Spain, but after ironing out some initial issues, they created a car that may have been tough to drive, but certainly had some speed in the hands of Lando Norris. Ultimately, the team could have been higher up the order had they had two drivers performing at the level of Norris, but in the end they dropped behind Alpine in the standings. For me, I'm struggling to believe McLaren are poised to take a big step up the order this year. They've changed their driver lineup and I believe it will be stronger, but it may take some time for Piastri to get comfortable on the F1 grid. Similarly, the team seem to have got comfortable in this best of the rest spot on the grid, and the momentum is falling away from them, which may mean that they drop to the back of this chasing pack. Number 5, Alpine. Alpine are a team that had a strong car last season, but it was fragile from a reliability perspective. So often their drivers would be in a good position only to be forced to retire due to their power unit. This happened because the team wanted to maximise their last opportunity to bring power-related upgrades until 2026. I hope that their reliability will be stronger this year, as that may be a good step in taking them up towards the frontrunners. Yeah, Gasly coming into the team was a sensible move, but until he proves he can be fast in a team outside of the AlphaTauri setup, there'll always be a doubt in his adaptability. I think it's going to be an interesting year for Alpine, and I have them drop a place to 5th in the standings. Number 4, Aston Martin. Aston Martin's position in my prediction is on the basis of the excellent momentum that they developed during the second half of the 2022 season. After recognising their initial development path was flawed before the season even began, the team produced a B-spec car that they bought in for the Spanish Grand Prix. This is a sign of the team's ability to adapt quickly and improve their car. In the second half of the year, Aston Martin went from strength to strength, scoring more consistent point scoring finishes and moving up the order. I think this team is best poised to take a step into the best of the rest spots, and I've been ambitious and put them fourth in my prediction. It feels like they're confident this season, and with there still being large gains available for teams, I think there's huge potential for Aston Martin to make a statement in 2023. Number 3, Ferrari. Ferrari were third in the second half of 2022, which is a worrying thought when you consider they had the fastest car early on in the season. Since the end of the year, the team have dropped their team principal once again as the steady revolving door of bosses continues at the team. This disruption is likely to cause issues for Ferrari as Fred Vasseur gets settled into his new role. So with the team's development not going to plan last year, coupled with the team's poor reliability in the season as well, I think Ferrari will drop to third in the standings. Number 2, Mercedes. Mercedes was second in the second half rankings, and I believe they have the potential to continue this progression. They changed their car throughout 2022 and managed to go from a car that was struggling to deal with the porpoising to one that was able to compete at most races. Russell's win in Brazil was a big step for the team as they showed what they're still capable of, and I expect the team that was so dominant from 2014 will still be able to continue to produce cars that are able to compete at the front. Number 1, Red Bull. And finally, I have Red Bull to win the championship. Given they had such a dominant year last season, it's reasonable to assume that they'll be the fastest once again. The team started the year with a strong car and were able to continue their progression and increase their lead. Plus, with Max Verstappen at the team, they'll surely get the maximum from the car. So it's 2 Constructors' Championships in a row for Red Bull. I'm about to get into my Drivers' Championship predictions, but before I get into those, I want to make sure that you're subscribed to Behind the Drive before the season begins, to make sure you don't miss out on any of the videos I'll be making this season. Drivers' Championship. Number 20, Logan Sargent. The driver I anticipate being bottom of the championship isn't from the team that I expect to come last, as I expect Logan Sargent is going to be the driver to score the fewest points. It's difficult for any driver to enter F1, and it will be especially difficult to enter a team that was firmly the worst in 2022. Sargent certainly has potential, and I hope he'll succeed in the sport, but he has a big year ahead of him and a moderate amount of pressure on his shoulders being an American driver. Number 19, Zhou Guanyu. Zhou Guanyu sits 19th for me as I believe he'll also have a difficult year. I expect the Alfa Romeo car to be a step behind the others, just as it was in the second half of last season, and so it will be difficult for Zhou to prove himself this year. Number 18, Valtteri Bottas. And despite a solid season for Alfa Romeo last year, I don't think Bottas will have the opportunity to excel this season. Bottas' role as team leader may be difficult in a backmarker team, but Alfa Romeo, or rather Sauber, are entering a transition phase that will leave them in no man's land in my view. Number 17, Yuki Tsunoda. I anticipate Yuki Tsunoda will struggle in 2023. He's had a difficult time in F1 so far, being beaten by Pierre Gasly in both of his F1 seasons. This year is incredibly important for Tsunoda. He needs to impress against Nick de Vries to solidify his seat on the grid and perhaps even attract the attention of some other teams. Personally, I don't think I've seen enough from Tsunoda to expect him to be able to beat de Vries, so he sits 17th for me. Number 16, Alex Albon. Albon is the key driver for Williams. He's following in the footsteps of George Russell as a young driver that can lead them through a difficult time. It's a new era for the team with James Vowles coming in to lead them, and so it will take some time for him to get up to speed. But I expect Albon can and will be patient, and I think he'll lead the way for that team this season. Number 15, Nico Hülkenberg. Hülkenberg has returned to the grid in a full-time seat for the first time in 3 years, and I expect he'll perform better than Schumacher did relative to Magnussen in 2022. However, I still expect the German driver to be behind the Dane. He's been out of the sport for several seasons, and despite some one-off substitute appearances, I think he'll still take a few races to get up to speed. But at the same time, I think the pair could be quite close at Haas this season. Number 14, Lance Stroll. I've got Stroll in 14th. The Canadian driver is scheduled to miss pre-season testing, and his injury, plus the fact he won't have the opportunity to get his eye in at testing time, means I expect he'll underperform this year relative to Alonso. I think Stroll has his work cut out anyway against the two-time champion, and I hope he proves me wrong this year, but I've got him quite a way down the order considering I have Aston Martin to come fourth in the constructors' standings. Number 13, Kevin Magnussen. Kevin Magnussen next, and I think he'll be 2 spots ahead of his Haas teammate. I think the Haas team will be quite average in 2023, but being compared with Hulkenberg rather than Schumacher will be a better pairing for the Danish driver as he has the opportunity to beat a more established teammate this year. Number 12, Nick de Vries. De Vries will be in 12th for me. I expect the Dutch driver will be a clear team leader at AlphaTauri, and he's one of the most experienced rookies the sport has seen in recent years. AlphaTauri will be likely in a tough battle to stay ahead of the teams towards the back of the order, and so I expect De Vries will be crucial in their attempt to get ahead. Number 11, Oscar Piastri. Piastri will have a strong first season in the McLaren in what I anticipate will be a close battle with Alpine. The Australian driver may take a few rounds to settle into his new car and team, but I expect he'll be very fast come the end of the season, just as he's been in most junior categories. I expect he'll be behind Norris, but not by as much as Ricciardo has been for the last couple of years. Number 10, Esteban Ocon. Just sneaking into the top 10 for me is Esteban Ocon. The French driver was the lead Alpine driver last season, but I expect he'll drop behind Pierre Gasly in 2023. I think Ocon may have a similar season to last year with lots of consistent results, but no spectacular performance where he pulls his Alpine car into the top 4 or 5 positions. Number 9, Lando Norris. And then I've got Lando Norris in 9th as I anticipate the British driver will continue his run of excellent form in the sport. McLaren may find themselves in 6th in the constructors, but I still expect Norris to be the leader in the team and getting the absolute maximum from his car in 2023. Number 8, Pierre Gasly. I think Gasly will have a strong first season with his new team, and I have him to lead the way in the Alpine setup. I think Gasly will be really motivated this season as he's got a lot to prove in his first F1 season outside of the Red Bull owned teams, and so I've got him finishing in 8th in the standings. Number 7, Fernando Alonso. Alonso will be the best of the rest driver in my opinion as the Spaniard will be fighting to get the Aston Martin up the order in 2023. At the Aston Martin launch, Alonso was very confident in his new team as they had a lot of momentum towards the end of last season, so I expect Alonso might even have a car that could allow him to compete with some of the top teams at some races this season. Number 6, Carlos Sainz. Carlos Sainz next, and I think the Ferrari driver will find it difficult to get back ahead of his teammate. Last year he made a few mistakes and got a bit unlucky, but I don't anticipate he'll be able to get more in the mix for the championship as his teammate did last year. Instead, I believe the Ferrari team may be in more competition with Mercedes rather than Red Bull. Number 5, Sergio Perez. Perez will be in 5th for me as I expect there'll be a more competitive order amongst the frontrunners in 2023. Perez did disappear for parts of last season, and he'll be under more scrutiny this year with Daniel Ricciardo waiting in the wings. I expect he'll be consistent, but not too close to Verstappen once again. Number 4, Charles Leclerc. I've got Leclerc in 4th as I expect Ferrari will drop a bit further behind Red Bull and not be as competitive as Mercedes this year. The Monegasque driver will continue to be the leader of the team, but I think he may find it more difficult as I expect Ferrari will drop back with them having to cope with a change in leadership. Number 3, Lewis Hamilton. I think this year Hamilton and Russell will be very close together. The pair were closely matched at times last year, and the fact that Russell came out on top laid down a marker for the 7-time world champion. But I'm going to predict that Hamilton will be behind Russell this year once again. To be honest, if Mercedes have any chance of competing for the Drivers' Championship this year, it'll be the driver that's ahead early on, and they will get the preferential treatment. So that may influence this order, but I'm going for Hamilton in 3rd. Number 2, George Russell. And I don't think Russell will be able to do enough to beat Verstappen in 2023. That Red Bull will still be dominant in the hands of Verstappen, and so George will have to settle for 2nd in this championship in my opinion. Number 1, Max Verstappen. Which of course leaves Verstappen to win a hat-trick of World Championships this year. I expect he'll be very strong once again, and it will be very difficult to beat the Dutchman in 2023. He's got a huge amount of talent and will probably have the best car once again, so it will be 3 in a row for Max Verstappen. So those are my 2023 predictions. Let me know which predictions I'll have got right and wrong in the comments, and make sure you subscribe for more.